Hey guys, moreblakey here and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be showing you how we can make a very simple checkpoint system where the player reaches a part of the level and will respawn there if they die moving forward. And this respawn point can be updated as we reach new checkpoints. Two very quick things before we start. If you have a tutorial you want to see, I've got a short form down below for you to request a tutorial now. And secondly, if you want to get the full scripts for these videos or direct one-to-one help from me if you're having trouble with the tutorials, I now have a Patreon you can check out down below. There's a ton of other benefits for you as well, so if you want to support me, check the description for the link. Now let's get started. So in this scene, as you can see, all we've got is a player, a background object, a main camera, some platforms here, and then finally a game manager empty game object that has nothing on there. And if we was to hit play, we have some very simple movement in which we can jump along these platforms with this man that has no arms and reach this final end platform. But at the moment, if we jump off, absolutely nothing happens and we fall for eternity. So the very first thing we need to do is set up a very simple system that will respawn our player at the start of the level. So what I'm going to do here, create an empty 2D object, go to sprites and then square. We can just call this respawn collider. On add components, we can add a box collider 2D. If you can't see your box collider, press this gizmos button at the top here. And then from here, we could just move this respawn collider down below all of these objects. Press R and then use the red gizmo to scale this out really wide. So it's long enough that wherever the player jumps off, it will always collide with this object. Now the last thing we're going to do with this respawn collider is go to our tags here, go to add tag, and then we can just call this respawn with a capital R. And then go to our tags and then just press on respawn here. And finally, on our box collider, just set this to is trigger because this is going to be a trigger game object. And you'll see how we use this in script if you haven't seen this before. Now we're going to create another empty game object and I'm just going to call this respawn point. Now we want to drag this game object all the way to the left here. So if the player jumps off at any point, it will respawn us back here. This is going to be the first step before we add checkpoints, just to get everybody who's watching on the same page. If you already have this set up, feel free to skip forward in the video. So now before we go into the script, let's go to our player here and just give him the tag player. If you do not have this tag, player with a capital P, go to add tag, press plus and then type in player here. And then go back to your player and add the tag. Now what I'm going to do is go to our respawn collider and I'm going to press add component and I'm just going to type in respawn script. Press new script, create an add, and let's open this up in Visual Studio. So the first thing we're going to do, at the top of our script here, we're going to get a reference to our player. So I'm going to go public game object player. We're going to get a reference to our public game object respawn point. Now we're going to use the function void on trigger enter 2D. Make sure to set our collider type to other here. So collider 2D other. Then we're going to do if other.gameObject.compare tag is equal to player with a capital P. So if other.gameObject.compare tag is equal to player, then we're going to access our player game object. We're going to do player.transform.position is equal to respawn point.transform.position. So essentially, if our player lands on this collider, then we're going to respawn the player back to the start of the level, which is where our respawn point is at. So now if we press play here, you can see I've got the scene here so you can see the collider. So if I actually select it in the editor, when we jump off here, you can see the player jumps into this collider and respawns back at this respawn point right here. So we can jump off again and you can see we land exactly here, which is exactly what we want. So now that we have this very basic script, we're going to make things just a little bit more complicated, but this is where our checkpoints come in. So what we're going to do here, our respawn point that we've got right here, I'm going to copy and paste this and we're going to be using this to make multiple checkpoints. So we can call this checkpoint 1 and we can just drag this to here, for example. The difference is with this checkpoint, we need to add a box collider. We can make this a little bit bigger, just like this, so the player cannot possibly miss it, and then just make it a trigger. And finally, we need to make a new tag, and I'm just going to call this checkpoint. Go back to our checkpoint and just add that tag. Next, we can copy and paste this and make a new checkpoint right here, and we could even make another one here. So now we have these 3 checkpoints right here, all with the checkpoint tag, all having a box collider, and all being a trigger. So now that we have these points, I'm going to go to checkpoint 1, and I'm going to press add component and then type in checkpoint script. Then I'm just going to press create and add. Now, when we open the script in Visual Studio, what I'm going to do here is similar to our respawn script. I'm going to use the function void on trigger enter 2D, change the collision 2D type to other, and then do if other.gameObject.compare tag is equal to player. So now before we put anything in here, what we're going to do is actually reference our respawn script. So I'm going to create a private reference, private respawn script respawn, and then in our awake function, which we are about to create, so we're going to do void awake. So awake happens before start, so it's good to reference any game objects in awake. And we're going to set respawn equal to game object dot find game object with tag, and then we're just going to type in respawn. And this is us referencing that tag we made a little earlier. But we're not done here because all we've done is reference the game object. We need to reference the script as that is the variable we have made. So we need to do dot get component, and then we can type in respawn script. So now we've referenced this script directly inside our checkpoint script. So now we can type in respawn, referencing the respawn script, and then from there we can do dot respawn point. So now we're setting the respawn point equal to this dot game object. So essentially what we're doing here is this script is on a checkpoint. So if the player walks into this checkpoint, this script is understanding that this checkpoint should be the new respawn point. So it communicates with the respawn script and accesses the current respawn point and sets the respawn point to the current checkpoint. So now anytime that the player drops off of the map, their transform dot position will be set to the respawn point, which may or may not now be a checkpoint, depending on how far they've got in the level. This might be a little bit hard to explain, but hopefully visualizing it will be a little bit easier. But before we do press play, we have this checkpoint script, but we need to drag it onto all 3 of our checkpoints, or as many as you have. So let's go to our other 2 and let's control click to select both of them and drag our checkpoint right here. So you can see now if we select any of our checkpoints, it has the script on all 3. So now finally, to make this a little bit easier before we press play, let's change checkpoint 1 to checkpoint 2 and then this name to checkpoint 3. And now if we press play, with the game and the scene showed at the same time, I can select our respawn collider game object. And you can see as we progress through the level, this respawn point is going to change. So I'm going to traverse through the level here. And you can see as we've just reached this first checkpoint here, our respawn point has been set to checkpoint 1. And now if we was to jump off the level, you can see that we actually respawn here. And we could do the same for the other checkpoints. So we've just reached a new one. So I'm going to jump off here. And you can see that we respawn right back in. And finally with the checkpoint 3, we can do the exact same. And every time we will respawn there. But there is one current issue with this, is that we can actually go backwards in the level. So if I was to go back to this platform, our checkpoint would update to checkpoint 2, when realistically it should stay at checkpoint 3. Maybe your game, you would like to keep it so players can make reverse progress in their game. But for this game, I'm going to show you how we can prevent this. Because right now, if we was to jump off, we would be reset back to this one and not this one. So there is a very simple fix for this. We can just go to our checkpoint script and we can just check if other.gameObject.compare tag after we set the respawn point. We're going to create a new line here, but what we're going to do, we are going to reference our box collider. So I'm going to do private box collider 2D. I can just call this collider. In our awake function, we can just do collider is equal to gets component box collider 2D. And finally, we can now access this collider. So collider.enabled is equal to false. So now the minute the player walks into this collider, it will set the new respawn point and disable the collider, so we can no longer access this checkpoint moving forward, meaning that whatever the furthest checkpoint is, that will never change unless they move forward with the level. I'm going to change this to checkpoint collider and do the same down here. And we're going to change it in our awake function here as well. Otherwise, Unity complain about using names that are already being referenced for something else. So now if we select our respawn collider and press play, without maximize on play enabled, you can see that as we progress through the level, we reach checkpoint number 1, we then reach checkpoint number 2, and if we go to our 3rd checkpoint but then try to go back, you can see that it stays at checkpoint 3 because there is no longer a collider there to collide into. And we can even go back to checkpoint 1 and you can see it stays at checkpoint 3. So if we was to jump off now, we've respawned all the way back at checkpoint 3, and now we can finally complete the level with the help of our checkpoints. So if you wanted to have visual checkpoints, you could visualize this with a simple animation on your checkpoint, which just triggers when you walk into the collider. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm not going to be adding that today. If you would like to see some of these things, maybe request it down below and I could do an extra video on my Patreon. But guys, that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed today's video and it was helpful. Again, don't forget to fill out the form below if you've got another tutorial you want to see. Other than that guys, I'll thank you all very much for watching today's video and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.